So now that we've had a great overview from Ariani on the potential pathways of environmental impact from cannabis production, I want to focus in specifically on some of those pathways with outdoor farms as they relate to wildlife. So my name is Phoebe Parker-Shames, and I'm a PhD student at Berkeley in the Environmental Science Policy and Management Department. My dissertation project takes a multidisciplinary approach to studying the ecological outcomes of cannabis legalization in Southern Oregon and Northern California. Today, I'm going to give a very brief overview of both existing and upcoming research. But first, let me talk about some of my guiding research questions. So as you've already heard a little bit from Ariani, because cannabis has traditionally been grown in rural, biodiverse regions, there are a lot of concerns about its potential impact on surrounding wildlife. However, outside of anecdotal reports, there's less empirical research on this topic. But understanding the scale and type of effects is really important for drafting appropriate policy and guiding strategies for coexistence. My research seeks to address this information gap by asking, how might outdoor cannabis production impact surrounding wildlife? How does legalization influence these impacts? And then what does the scale or threshold of these impacts suggest for the best strategies for coexistence? So now here's a little bit about what we know so far. We collaborated with cannabis farmers in Southern Oregon to set up wildlife monitoring cameras, like the one pictured in this slide, on and surrounding cannabis farms to study the ways that animals respond to production sites. The results from this study were published in the California Fish and Wildlife Special Issue on Cannabis, and a copy of this paper, called Coexisting with Cannabis, can be found on the CRC website under Publications on the Environment. You can also read the highlights in our science brief on cannabis, agriculture, and wildlife. But I'll share a couple of the findings here as well. Preliminary results from wildlife monitoring efforts indicate that wildlife are still present at production sites. However, individual species like deer or foxes respond differently. So the overall community of wildlife on farms is dominated by smaller and more domesticated species, and generally fewer wild predators. Here's a little bit of what that looks like. At a site like this that has a large fence around the perimeter, the animals present at the site are smaller, like this rabbit. But even without fences, we see more domesticated animals, such as this dog. However, it doesn't entirely mean that larger wildlife or predators are completely absent from these production sites. We do still see large predators using cannabis farms, such as this mountain lion, but they typically are moving through these farms at night. This is especially the case for animals that we found to be more sensitive to cannabis farms, such as this gray fox, which our models suggest may typically avoid farms, but in this case, we see passing through the site at night. As you can probably tell, these responses really depend on the individual species and likely also the individual animal behavior. And the pattern isn't always clear. So for instance, we see this bobcat, unlike the other predators, actually moving through the site during the day. While these photos are really useful for guiding some of our understanding about use of sites, there are a few things that these photos can't tell us. So first, what specifically about these production sites might or might not cause animals to make these adjustments? And two, how widespread might these effects be? For this second question, we have an upcoming paper that we're finishing analyses on right now. So hopefully in the next couple months, we'll have more information that we can post on the website. As for the second question, this is something we're asking with our upcoming work. So thanks to funding from the Bureau of Cannabis Control, as well as the UC Reserve's Baird Award, we're setting up experiments at the Hopland Research and Extension Center and Angelo Coast Range Reserve, both in Mendocino, to study the impact of light and noise, both separately and together, on multiple different taxa of wildlife. We're hoping that this research isolating potential impact mechanisms can help uncover distance or intensity thresholds, as well as individual species responses to different disturbance cues, and ultimately help guide best practice recommendations. If you're curious about any of this, please ask questions or feel free to get in touch afterwards, after the panel. Much of my research is still ongoing and there are opportunities to get involved.